Hi everyone, my name is Amelia, and welcome to the video. So, I've recently gotten into Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen, and I have absolutely loved the game so far. I've been a World of Warcraft player for years, and I found myself searching for similarities in the game just to help me adapt to, its harsh conditions easier so that I could have a better time in the game and understand its classes to a better extent. I realize this video is rather niche, but this channel is pretty bare bones right now, and I just felt like making it. Today, I'm going to be going through every class currently available in Pantheon, and tell you which class most relates to an existing World of Warcraft class. This video is meant to be for those like me that came from WoW and wanted to know which classes they might like if they spent a great deal of time in Azeroth. Before I begin, I feel the need to say that this is not necessarily a definitive guide. Pantheon and WoW are two very different games. If I say a class in Pantheon plays most like a mage in WoW, it doesn't mean that they play exactly the same. Fights are slower in Pantheon and require much more strategy and planning compared even to classic WoW. With that hour out of the way, let us begin. I will be dividing this video into 4 parts for the 4 class types in Pantheon, which are tank, healer, DPS, and support. Feel free to check the timestamps in the description below if you would like to skip around. Starting us off with the tanks, we will be talking about the Dire Lord. Dire Lords are most like Blood Death Knights. They are a tanking spec that utilizes blood-related abilities and tanks by healing and shielding themselves with their resources. You also get an ability that is basically the same thing as the anti-magic shell in WoW, and you get a slowing root like Chains of Ice, and you also get an ability that literally just pulls an entire group of enemies directly to you, just like a Death Knight in WoW. So go with Dire Lord if you enjoy blood decays for sure. The next tank is the Paladin, which is most similar to a protection paladin with some hints of a blood death knight. Paladins in Pantheon tank fights by sprinkling lots of little heals on themselves and their group throughout the engagement, as well as debuffing their enemies. You have abilities such as Lay on Hands and Consecration and even an invulnerability bubble and a castable stun. I'll throw blood decay in here as well, just due to the fact that you heal so much of your health while tanking, as well as paladins in Pantheon having an ability to yank an enemy directly to them, like that of a DK. The third and final tank currently in the game is the Warrior, which surprisingly enough are very similar to protection warriors in WoW. You're a plate-wearing tank that uses shields and battle shouts. You can taunt and charge at enemies, slam them with your shield, and even have an ability called Last Stand, which is much like in WoW. I had a hard time writing for this one. It's really just your standard warrior archetype. You can deploy various war banners to boost and buff your group, which is pretty interesting though. Moving on to the healers, the first we will talk about is the Cleric, which, in my opinion, is most like a Holy Priest, with some flavors of Holy Paladin. Much like Holy Priests in WoW, the Cleric in Pantheon is like your default bread and butter healer. You press a button to heal, and you heal. You can summon a shield barrier to place on allies, much like Power Word Shield. And there's a spell that buffs your allies' health and armor, which fundamentally does the same thing as Power Word Fortitude does. Cleric also has the Pantheon equivalent of Prayer of Mending as well, and you also get a damage dealing ability that is basically just Smite. Other abilities include a Shackle Undead and spells to cleanse debuffs like poison and diseases. I have to mention there are some similarities to Holy Paladin as well, due to you wearing plate and a shield. And there's also a spell that causes you to gain mana upon a successful melee attack. So you may be finding yourself up front and personal with your enemies compared to a priest in WoW. Next up, at the time of recording, is the most recent class to be added to the game, the Druid. I find Pantheon Druids most like Restoration Druids and Shamans in WoW. You have abilities like Thorns and Entangling Roots, as well as Bark Skin, and the ability to turn into a tree. As for healing, the Pantheon Druid seems to just buff the hell out of a player's natural health regen, which I suppose in return makes it more of like a heal over time class, much like the Resto Druid in WoW. You also get a direct healing spell from your wolf companion pet, and there's a damage over time ability that sends a bunch of wasps and bees to your enemies, much like the insect swarm in Classic. As for the Resto Shaman parts, it's really just a bunch of little flavors. You're given a wolf farm that boosts your movement speed, and you have a lightning bolt ability and an interrupt that is like a gust of wind, I guess. Moving on to the final healer, this is the Shaman, which I find to be most like the Restoration Druid in WoW, more so than the actual Pantheon Druid, surprisingly. The Shaman in Pantheon is a strict heal over time healer. All of their spells are hots, and the one direct healing spell that they have also leaves a hot on the target afterwards. To circumvent this, Shamans have an ability that causes a hot on the target to immediately end, healing them for the full effect of the heal over time spell itself. Shamans also get quite a few damage over time effects as well. I guess kind of similar to Druid and WoW with their Moonfire and Sunfire spells. Now on to the DPS, or damage dealers, of Pantheon. Starting with the Monk. This may come as a huge shock, but the Monk reminds me of the Monk. No, but really, it's a melee class that punches and kicks and uses chi as a resource. There are many similar spells like that of a WoW's Monk, such as a spinning wheel kick, and an ability that just lets out a big flurry of punches all at once. There are also attacks that heal you for small amounts and weakens enemies' defenses, causing your group to deal more damage to them, and a leg sweep that can knock enemies down. Other weird little things include being able to do a backflip, and they for some reason gave Monk a feigned death ability similar to Hunter in WoW. Next up is the Ranger, which most reminds me of the Hunter, specifically the classic WoW Hunter. This is mainly due to the fact that you start fights at range, shooting your enemy with arrows and, various ranged attacks, before closing in on the kill and disposing of your enemies in melee range. You do not have a permanent pet like in WoW, but you can summon various animals to assist you for a short time through the use of your spells. There are also abilities such as rapid fire, and aimed shots, a trap to root enemies, and the ability to track mobs. You also get the ability to leap backwards or forwards a great distance, depending on the situation that you're in. On to the rogue, and they're most like rogues, but with flavors of survival hunter as well. You're a sneaky assassin that can use daggers, stealth, poisons, can backstab, and uses combo points. You also have some survival abilities, such as various bombs and traps. It's basically just the standard gameplay of a rogue, but you get to throw explosives and lay traps to ambush enemies. The Summoner is up next, and these guys are interesting. They're like a Demonology Warlock, but with some flavors of Mage sprinkled in as well. Summoners can summon things. They have a variety of different elementals they can summon, which can tank or deal damage or even be support. They can also summon things such as food and water for players, as well as summon players themselves. Instead of imps like Demonology Warlocks, they instead just summon spikes and swords and axes to sling at enemies with their magic. If you enjoy Demonology Warlock but don't enjoy the class fantasy of being a warlock and just constantly surrounded by demons, then the Summoner is perfect for you. On to the final DPS class, we have reached the mighty Wizard, which I have chosen to go with Mage and bits of Elemental Shaman as the best comparison that I can make. I had a difficult time with this one, honestly. At the surface, the Wizard just kind of seems like a glorified mage due to sharing so many spells with the World of Warcraft mage. But the Wizard has an interesting builder-spender mechanic that reminds me of Maelstrom in WoW. Except each element the Wizard uses, which is fire, cold, and shock, basically has its own resource that you must track and use accordingly to empower your spells. As for the spells themselves, you have your basic mage stuff like frostbolts and fireballs and blizzards, but with different aims. You also get a tiny familiar that will assist you in combat. It's kind of like the arcane familiar in WoW. Wizards also gain the ability to create portals, which is just as useful in Pantheon as it is in Classic. Alright, now onto the fourth and final class type in Pantheon, the supports. There are only 2 in the game at the time of recording, so let's begin with the Enchanter, which is basically a full-on support / crowd control mage. If you enjoy the utility and crowd control that mages bring in WoW, then Enchanter will be perfect for you. You get a multitude of stuns and ways to gain control of the battlefield to keep mobs at bay and protect your groups. Think things like sheeping and slowing, buffing and debuffing. Take those parts of the WoW mage, but make it an entire class. And that is what the Enchanter is in Pantheon. Specifically, you have abilities that just straight up make enemies useless until attacked. And you can stun entire groups of enemies. And you can buff allies with intelligence and restore mana to your healers and casters. You can place debuffs on enemies and stripping them of their own buffs, as well as removing some of their resistances. It's basically an arcane mage, but with an immense focus on support, and less of a focus on dealing damage yourself. The final class we will be talking about today is the Necromancer, which is basically a support / crowd control warlock. If you enjoy the utility and crowd control a warlock brings in WoW, then you will like the Necromancer for sure. You're a dark magic wielding caster that can summon skeletal minions and curse targets with dots and various debuffs. You also get a lifesteal to suck the life out of your enemies. It's basically an Affliction Warlock, but with extra focus on curses and various means of crowd control. As for the curses, you have a ton of things to choose from, such as removing a target's stamina, strength, intellect, charisma, speed, or even disorienting them or fearing them entirely, making them pretty useless. You can also sacrifice your own health bar to assist your group, such as giving some of your health to your tank, while you sit all pretty in the back lines and dish out your curses and spread diseases all over the place. It has that sense of danger and risk that warlocks in WoW can have with their spells such as, life tap. Well, that just about does it, I guess. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I apologize for not having gameplay of each class, but it takes a long time to level in this game, and it would be pretty unrealistic for me to be able to showcase every ability that I spoke of. I hope my descriptions proved to be beneficial enough for you all. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope to see you all very soon. Thank you for listening to my silly voice. I appreciate you. Much love, have fun, and goodbye.